Hi and welcome to the Music Production Handbook. I'm going to do a video here that complements the blog about compression. I've done two blogs, one which looks at the functions of the compressor and what its basic fundamentals are, which is to control the dynamic range. And I've got some examples there in terms of also manufacturers that produce some excellent plugins. But I've also talked about the different aspects of it in terms of threshold, attack, release, ratio, the gain or makeup gain, as sometimes it's referred to, knee, and the in and the out. And then I've also included some mathematical bits and pieces just to try and help put that together in terms of what's going on in terms of the processes. And then also included a video by Fab Dupont from his excellent site puremix.org. He explains how compressor has come into our domain in terms of recording, and the fact that he put some guy out of a job. And he explains it very well, and he's got a really good sense of humour. And there's some other great videos that he has on there which are for free, or you can subscribe. But this video is not telling you about those sorts of things. You can read, you can watch other bits and pieces. What this is going to show you is about what you're listening for when using a compressor. So jumping into Logic here. Starting with the Platinum compressor as a basic startup. It's also got a Focusrite Red, 1176 Black, DBX160A, SSL bus compressor, vintage version 1176, and an LA2A or modern version of that. And again, they're all sort of, it's Logic or Apple have reskinned it to show you what you're emulating. Also, what I'm going to do is here, normally it's set to output, but on the sidechain here, you've got the detection here. I'm going to set it to peak, just so that you can see when I talked about the input signal coming in, how the threshold and those two will correlate. I won't explain those in detail in terms of peak and RMS. That's in another blog that I'm on my site as well, which you can check out, which explains those differences. So what I'm going to do is just deal with kick and snare today. Just keep it nice and simple. I've got two kick drums and they're routed to a bus channel. The reason why is I can then process the one channel and use the blend of those two mics that are set up on the kick, and then process the one and treat it as one channel there. And I've done the same with the snare as well. It just makes life a lot easier when it comes to processing. And so let's take a look. So I'm going to play the sound, or play the drum, or the bass drum as it were, with no processing, just so you can see where the signal should be. I'd like to generally try and keep it between the -6 and -3 point there. Too much signal, it will trigger the compressor to work too hard and too early. So you want some control. So if I hit play, you'll see, and you can get to listen to what the actual bass drum sounds like pre-processed. Does that if you turn the bypass off? So looking at that, it's anywhere between sort of -8 and -6 in terms of the actual volume there, which is going to be important in a minute because I'll explain very quickly the math. You've got the threshold here, which will then obviously dictate when the compressor starts to work. I'm going to set the ratio. You must set the ratio first in order to get the compressor to start activating. I'm going to set it at 2 to 1, just so you can see what happens. When I gradually reduce the threshold, so once it starts hitting about this -7, -8, you'll start to see this needle begin to move, okay? Because that's the correlation between the peak signal and the threshold. And I'm going to gradually take it around to about -16, and that will see us with approximately about -4, -5 dB of gain reduction. So if we take a look. So basically what's happening there is that our compressor's working. So it's set at 2 to 1. So that means that for every 2 decibels over our threshold, 1 decibel comes out. So our threshold is set at -16. And as you see, there's signals between 8 and 6. So if you do the math, 16 and 8, the difference between that is 8. And if you divide that by 2, that's 4. So at the moment, we've got about 4 dB of gain reduction. So that's showing us that we've now our output signal is 4 dB quieter. That's where the makeup gain comes in, and you can then bring that up. It doesn't always mean exactly, it just shows you, and you can then check that between bypass. So by bypassing the compressed sound and then check it and turn it back on. So they should by rights be about the same in terms of volume. Yeah, they're about the same. It sounds more positive, essentially, because I'm making up and bringing up the floor now compared to the actual ratio of the compressor bringing down the ceiling. So that's all very well and good, but what I really want to focus on now is the attack and the release and how you can change and shape the sound. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to up it. So I'm going to go with a heavier compression just so it's much more obvious. And I'm going to nick an 1176 setting of 8 to 1. Just so that it's much more obvious, and you'll see now that when I hit play, the needle's going to move much more, because obviously every 8 dB that goes over, 1 dB is going to come out. So there we go, it's working a lot heavier. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to reduce the attack, and we should start to see more of the transient of the bass drum come back to us, and more of that sort of initial punch and the attack of the beta hitting the actual skin. So what we'll do is I'm going to reduce that first. There you go, it's coming back now. So it's got much more of that initial attack again. And if I then increase the attack time again, you'll start to hear it become more of a thud. Because by compressing that transient, it actually dulls the sound. Now that can be desirable. You can start to see it starting to change and shape the tone. And it also can help with EQ then, and some of the EQ decisions you make later on. So here we go. And if I bypass it, it's a very subtle sort of thing going on there where it just sounds more fuddy. And then the release, as I increase the release time, the snare drum in the background is going to get suppressed more because the compressor is going to stay on for longer. So if we check that out. So I've now gone quite extreme with that, and you can hear that the snare is actually quite suppressed in the background compared to without. So if I go back now and reduce the attack time, release time, sorry. There you go, instantly from about this point here, the snare starts coming into play more. Whereas if I increase it again, so we can use that to help shape it, and if I then, you can also manipulate the two. So I'm just going to play between them and see what we get. Yeah, that's sounding cool, because what's happening here is that it's allowing the transient through, but then it's suppressing the after part as well. So we can look at it on the graph as well, how that's behaving. So as it compresses, the line's going to drop to show our gain reduction, and then watch the release as it starts to curve off. So here we go. Compared to a quicker release time. So there's quite a lot of sustain of the bass drum there, whereas if I increase that again, it reduces that sustain and actually makes it very much more a tighter bass drum sound. I quite like this. Now, obviously there's a change in volume now. So I've made up the gain by 3 dB. I'm just going to bring up the output here as well, just by... So the difference there is now between the bypassed and and the actual process sound is the bass drum will appear to be louder because it's much more positive in between on the hits. So I'm going to basically start off without compression by bypassing it, and then I'll turn it on. You can then hear the difference and see whether you like it or not. Now, where I've made up the gain and the output, you will hear there's a slight lift in the snare as well. That's part and parcel of it. But I actually quite like the actual sound of the bass drum there. I think that's much more positive. Now, if we jump to the snare, we can actually bring in a whole bunch of different sort of tonalities for the snare as well. I'm just going to reset this. So, I've increased the gain a little bit because the snare's a bit on the quiet side. So I'm going to set for this, I'm going to go with my, I'm going to go 8 to 1, just over the top for the minute, just to make it really obvious. So you can hear how it can really sort of change the tonality and the character of the snare. So you can hear it's really dropped the volume now because I've got quite a high ratio going on here. And then also, as I'm bringing the threshold up, which is about 16, minus 16, it's really sort of compressing and it's squashing that initial transient of the snare. So it kind of blurs it a little bit. So with compression and without. So it's really flattened it. What I am going to do now is then play with the attack time and the release time, just so you can hear how it will change. So I'm going to slow the attack time down first. So that's brought my transient back out now. It's no longer sounding so smushed at the front. Yes, smush is the technical term. And now I'm going to just play with the release time. So if I have a really short release time, the snares are coming back through and it sounds quite cool there. But I also quite like it when I sort of release, change the release time, make it longer, because it's suppressing everything else and it makes it almost clean sounding. If I bypass it, so I need to make up this gain a bit. So now it appears louder. I'm looking at this metering here, and actually the metering is about the same. But the compressor, because of what it's doing to the overall dynamic range, is making the snare appear louder now. Now, if we actually put it back in its context, we can listen actually at how it changes the snare's characteristic within the kit. So here we go. So no compression. So what I've done there actually is just messed around with the release time, just made it a bit quicker. And it's really brought out that sort of ringing overtone of the snare, which then gives it a lot more pop and characteristic compared to what we had before. So I'll just play that once more. So without the compressor. It's quite sort of indistinct. Now if I play it with the compressor. So there you go, just a very quick introduction and just sort of using the compressor and just playing with the attack and the release time, just messing around with it, changing the tonality. As to what's right, that comes down to you and your own sort of taste, and what you formulate is your taste. Worth listening to different records and actually how great producers, and they use the compressor not just for the dynamic range purpose, but they're also using it as a tone shaper. well worth playing, and the more you do it, the better you get. Anyway, so have fun, happy mixing, and I'll catch you sometime soon. Cheers.